What is a public good? Okay, the basic definition is a public good is both non-rival and non-excludable in consumption. Okay, so we need to explain those terms. What does non-rivalry mean and what does non-excludability mean in consumption? So first, let's start with rivalry versus non-rivalry. Okay, in this particular case, a rival good, first definition, or service occurs when one person's use prevents another from using the same good. Okay, and a good example is food. You know, when you eat your breakfast, you're the only one that gets to enjoy the benefits of that breakfast, that particular breakfast. That particular food is yours when you eat it. It can't be used by somebody else simultaneously. And you would say, well, of course it can't. But in saying that, you are recognizing that food is a rival good. It's either you get the food or somebody else gets the food. You can't both have the food unless you split it, in which case you only get half of it. Okay? So that's a rival good, and that's easy to understand. A non-rival good is a good or service when one person's use does not prevent another person from using it simultaneously. Okay, so where does that show up? One of the classic examples in economics texts is the lighthouse service. If you put a lighthouse up on the coastline, it's there to prevent passing ships from coming too close to shore and running into the rocks. That's the general idea of a lighthouse. Well, once you put the lighthouse up and you shine the light out to the sea, any passing ship that comes by is going to be warned away from the coast and away from the rocks. The fact that one ship moving north to south sees the light from the lighthouse and stays away doesn't prevent another ship moving from south to north at the same time seeing the same light and also avoiding the coastline and avoiding the rocks. So once you put the light out there, everybody that comes by can use it, and they can use it at the same time, and that's the issue of non-rivalry. Okay, same idea, and we're going to talk about roads as being an important public good. Roads, when they're uncongested, are non-rival because you can just go outside, get in your car, and drive down the road. And there are other cars also driving down the road. And as long as it's not a traffic jam where you can't move, you know, you're able to get passage on the roads and use it to your own needs, while other people are also using the roads for their own needs simultaneously. So again, non-rival in consumption. Second aspect, non-excludability. A public good has to be non-excludable in consumption. Now, what does that mean? Excludability versus non-excludability. An excludable good or service occurs when it's possible to restrict the access or use of a particular good or service. A good is non-excludable when you can't keep people from using it. So once the good or service is being provided for a community, it's impossible or difficult, I should say, to keep people from using that particular good. Now, oftentimes with non-excludability, you can exclude people sometimes, but sometimes you don't. So let me give you some examples. So back to excludability, food and clothing and housing are all examples of excludable goods because it's easy to, lock up your food and clothing and keep other people from using it at the same time. Your housing is yours and you try to prevent squatters from coming in and using your bedroom while you're out, right? You lock up your doors and you exclude people from the consumption of your houses and so forth. Now, roads can also be, you can exclude people from roads too, and we do that in the form of toll roads. You actually have to pay to get onto the road, and that payment can prevent some people who might decide, hey, I don't want to pay the money to go on that road, and they don't. Okay, so roads are a good example where you could exclude people, but oftentimes, in fact, most times, you don't exclude people from the use of roads. Okay, so whether roads become a public or a non-public good depend on whether we exclude people or don't exclude people from the use of those particular roads. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Now, what about non-excludability? Again, let's go back to the lighthouse service. Once the lighthouse service is provided and the light is shined out into the ocean, it's impossible to keep people that happen to be passing by from using the service. So let's say you got two ships coming by and you want to say, okay, well, we want to charge somebody for the use of this particular lighthouse service. All right, how would you do that? How would you go out and monitor ships passing in the night and try to keep track of who's coming by? Once the light is out there and shining to the sea, it's going to be very difficult to keep people that pass by from using that particular light for their own benefit and staying clear of the rocks. Okay, so the lighthouse, it may not be impossible, but it's very difficult to exclude people from using the service once it's provided out there. Okay, and freeways, it's easy to exclude, but we sometimes choose not to exclude people. Okay, and freeways, you get onto a road for free and you don't pay a toll of any sort. Well, those are examples where the road has been made non-excludable and therefore matches the definition of a public good. Almost all of the products that we have been talking about, when we talk about the butter market or the clothing market or the coffee market or whatever, we're down here, where the products are both rival and excludable in consumption. We call them private goods. And so private goods are the classic, typical example of most goods and services that we refer to and talk about in economics. Public goods are up here in a box where it's both non-excludable or non-excluded and non-rival in consumption simultaneously. Okay, now there are no goods that are perfect public goods where it's completely non-rival and completely non-excluded or non-excludable, but there are goods or services that get close to that. A couple of the classic examples of public goods are the national defense, the police protection services locally, the judicial system can be thought of as a public good, lighthouses like I've mentioned, but national defense and security is a good example of the service that's being provided with national defense is something which if you provide for your entire community, you know, you're providing safety services, basically. You're trying to keep people safe from foreign intervention, foreign invasion, trying to protect your property from foreigners. That's what the national defense is supposedly there for. And once you provide that defense for a community, for a country, it's very hard to say, well, you know, you over here on this street get the defense, but you over here on that street, you're not going to get any defense. How do we keep people from participating in the defense once it's provided? And also, since the product here is a sense of safety and security from the threat of invasion, once you've provided some level of national defense, then everybody in the country is going to simultaneously feel the benefits of that safety and security. So it's non-rival in consumption as well, okay, as are these other products and things that are listed here. All right, now we're going to talk in a couple of lectures or so, we're going to talk about common resources. At that time, we'll talk about how common resources are rival in consumption, but they're difficult to exclude people from participating and using ocean fisheries or pasture lands and so forth. And then lastly, there's this natural monopolies or club goods, which we'll include that as another class of types of goods, but we're not going to be talking about that in any detail. All right, now, what is the problems that we face? Public good provision is difficult in a free market. So that's the first thing to recognize. Okay, and I'm going to give you an example of exactly why it's difficult and what problems can arise from that. But the basic idea is essentially because of the non-excludability aspect, it's difficult to get payment from consumers who can easily do what's called free riding. Okay, so what is free riding? Free riding occurs whenever someone receives a benefit without paying for it. All right, here's some examples. Let's say you arrive at your hometown at the airport and you run into a friend, and the friend is on their way home from a business trip and they're about to get into a taxi cab and they say, come on and join me, you live near me, you can get a ride for free. I'm going to put this on my company's expense anyway, and so you don't have to pay for anything. Good example of a free ride. It's like what we would call it. I'm getting a free ride. You watch a fireworks show in your neighbor's backyard. Okay, they paid for the fireworks, you didn't, but you were able to watch it from where you were. They couldn't exclude you because you could look over the fence. You're free riding on their particular expenditure that they provided. Wikipedia is a good example. You get all sorts of benefits from Wikipedia, and if you don't contribute to them, which perhaps most people don't, you're getting a benefit for free. National Public Radio, good example. They come on regularly and ask for contributions and say, look, you're getting these benefits. You really should contribute and donate and participate. Give money. If you give money, you're not free riding. If you don't give money, you're free riding. Okay, let's go on. All right, it's the non-rival and non-excludable nature of a public good that makes free riding easier. Okay, here's what happens though. If we said, let's suppose we allow private firms to open up and try to supply a public good, what would happen? Analysis suggests that what would happen is that because of the difficulty of raising money to support the provision of the public good, because free riding is a possibility, you're likely to get a bunch of free riders. And that means the private firms are quite likely to undersupply the public good if they supply it at all. So we might not just not get a public good, and that would be a problem. I mean, it would be nice to have national defense. It would be nice to have local police to support public order in the local community. It's nice to be able to have roads that you can just go out and use, and we don't even think about that. We don't think that, oh, somebody actually arranged this system to make roads free and non-excludable and non-rival, and I can go out and use them. That's a good system, we know. If we didn't have it, and it had to be provided by private firms, we might not get enough roads. We might not get enough public goods, and that could be a problem. If governments come in, however, and provide public goods, they can force taxpayers to pay and therefore eliminate the free rider problem. Okay, what governments have that other entities don't have is they have the ability to tax. And taxing comes about as a matter of law. If you violate the law, you can be punished because punishments will be put into any kind of situation where you violate a particular law. So if they say you've got to pay taxes, you got to pay taxes. And if you don't, well, government can use the power of the government to basically either fine you or put you into jail if you don't follow the laws that are being administered. All right? So that power of the government can be useful in this particular circumstance because the government can then just force taxpayers to pay, and then they can use those taxes to finance public good provision and actually provide the benefits that are going to come from that. Okay? And so instead of undersupplying the public good, the government can actually create an appropriate level of the public good. And that's a good thing. Now, I want to highlight here that government provision of public goods can, but not will, can raise supply to the optimal level. Okay? And here I want to distinguish between what's possible but not automatic. So when the government provides for the national defense, for example, it can provide the optimal level of national defense, but it doesn't automatically do that because there's going to be different levels of public goods that can be provided, and the government can either also undersupply or oversupply a public good relative to what's optimal. So it's not just because they do supply a public good doesn't mean that they will do it at the optimal level. Okay, so let's do one example here. So I'm going to go back to a very simple, sort of an ancient situation where you've got a small community of farmers that have gotten together in a particular area, created a small town or village, and they're producing crops. But they face the following problem. They got 6 farms out there, and they sometimes have their crops stolen by bandits. So bandits come from the outside, and they attack the farms. They steal from them. Okay, and that's a problem that regularly exists in this particular community, and so they're trying to find a solution. How do we keep out or stave off the bandits? So if they can build a wall, that's going to make it more difficult or perhaps impossible. If you build the wall high enough, you're going to be able to prevent the theft from taking place, let's say. Let's just assume that that's true. And we're going to let the values inside the parentheses here, we're going to let those represent the dollar value willingness to pay for a wall for each farm. All right, so each farm gets certain benefits from having the wall and preventing the theft. But the theft doesn't happen all the time. They don't lose all their goods. They just lose some of their goods occasionally. It's kind of probabilistic, let's say. And maybe the farms are different sizes and they have different amounts to lose, and so that's associated with the different values here. But maybe it's because, like, notice I have farm E and farm F in the middle here, and they say they're only willing to pay up to $5 to protect themselves from theft. Well, maybe one of the reasons for that is when the bandits come in from the side, they steal what's readily available. And so they're going to steal from farm B and farm C first if they come in from this direction. But they have to travel further and across farms to get into farm F and E. And so Farm E and F are protected naturally by their position in the community. It's just harder for the bandits to get into them. So even though they might have the same crop as Farm B and Farm D, they're less vulnerable to theft because of their position. And in fact, they're free riding, you might say, on their position in the community because they don't get attacked as much as Farm B, Farm D, Farm C, and Farm A do. Okay, but and so I'm giving you a story for why the valuations could vary here. Could be different sized farms, different amounts of economic activity, or it could be just the position in the community that makes them more or less susceptible to banditry here. All right, now, Mansur Olson did some other writings later on, and he made a distinction between, and kind of talked about early communities trying to solve the problem of roving bandits, he called them. And this is what I have in mind here. You've got roving bandits, which are, hunter-gatherer tribes outside of this small farming community. And what they've decided is they could either hunt for game themselves, or they could get grain and other products easier if they just, ride in on their horses to a community and they steal it from people. Okay, and that would be a roving bandit. They just kind of wander around from community to community and steal from people. All right, now small communities need protection from the bandits who are likely to rape, pillage, and plunder, a common phrase used in describing this, and that's where the wall comes in. And I've got an example here from France. This is Carcassonne, France, where a wall has been built not around farms, but around a merchant community in ancient times. And why build walls except to protect yourself from the threat of invasion outside? And I'll give you a good reference for a movie to watch if you want to see how this can play out in a real community and some of the issues that arise. Watch the Japanese film Seven Samurai, which is actually better than a remake that was made several times later in the US called The Magnificent Seven. Maybe you've seen that, but it's a problem here. The problem is, what do you do about roving bandits? How do you protect yourself against them in a community? You can build a wall, or you can hire 7 samurai to protect yourself instead. Now let's see how we can solve the problem. Suppose an individual wall, the blue one listed here, around any of one of the farms costs $20 to build. Okay, so one wall costs $20. But suppose if you build a green wall here, the green one across the entire exterior of the community, like Carcassonne, let's say it costs $50 to build. So that means there are economies of scale in the production of walls here. If you protect a larger community, it's cheaper to do so than if you try to protect each individual individually. All right? So let's consider methods to improve economic efficiency in this particular case. And remember, we've got all these willingnesses to pay for protection services, a wall, and we've got to find out whether it's economically viable to do that. All right, suppose we consider individual walls. Suppose each farmer builds their own individual wall. All right, they're going to pay $20 for each of those walls. So Farm E spends $20, Farm A spends $20. The total benefits are going to be equal to the summation of the benefits, 10, 15, 5, and so forth. And that's going to equal $65 in total benefits. But if they each build an individual wall, it's going to cost them 6 times 20, or $120. And that means the profit of building individual walls is going to be $65 in benefits minus $120 in costs for a grand total of minus $55. Doesn't make sense collectively or individually for any of these farmers to build a wall because they don't get the benefits that they get. It's too costly to build a wall. So it won't be chosen. Individuals just won't provide this for themselves. All right, so how can we correct the problem? Number 1, collective action. The farmers get together and talk about this issue amongst themselves. And one farmer takes it upon themselves to solicit contributions from the farmers. All right, they go around and say, would you be willing to pay for a wall? How much? What can I get your support? And so forth and so on. And suppose farmers A to D each contribute their maximum amount minus $1. I'm making up this story just to have some substance to talk about, okay? So they each contribute. So Farm A contributes $9, and Farm B contributes $14, and so forth. Okay, this is how much they collect to contribute to building a group wall. Okay, they go to Farm E and they ask, will you contribute? They say, no, I'm not going to give you any money. Farm F, they say, no, I'm not going to give you any money. Okay, so E and F free ride. They refuse to pay anything. what happens? Okay, collective action continued. So the total payment is going to be 3 times 14. That's the 3, Farm B, C, and D. Farm A is $9, and that's going to sum up to a total cost of $51. The net benefit for A to D is going to be an extra $1 they're going to make. So they're going to get a net benefit of 4. That's going to be the 10 minus 9, 15 minus 14, 15 minus 14, and so forth. That's going to be $1 extra each. So they're each getting just a little bit of benefit relative to their cost. But E and F are getting a pretty sizable benefit because they didn't pay anything, but they're getting totally $5 plus $5 for a total of $10 benefit without having to pay for it. Now, suppose the extra $1 is used for a party after the construction of the wall, and of course E and F are not going to get invited because they didn't contribute any money to any of this effort. And they're probably going to be looked down upon by the community because they are knowingly free riding on this particular endeavor. Okay, and that alone, that social pressure might be enough to get E and F to contribute something. Again, small groups can form a collective action and do something, and they could put pressure upon members they know are not contributing. So actually, this small group might mean E and F are going to have difficulty opting out, but I assume they did. Now, this outcome is economically efficient because the net benefit, NB, is greater than 0, and it's equal to $14 up here plus the $1 for the party. So they get actually a benefit of $15 in total overall. But it's not going to be considered completely just or fair because of the free rider element. So how do we solve the free rider problem? Well, one way is to put into place what we might call a benevolent government. Government comes in and says, all right, well, we'll build a wall. I've got this group of individuals. They're not individual farmers, but they just say, hey, we're going to form a government. We're going to go out and we're going to use the power of government to implement a taxation system. Okay, and let's say they say, well, the wall is going to cost us $50 to build. That means every farm should contribute an equal amount. Let's assume they all are viewed as equal in some sense. So they charge them $8.33 each. 833 times 6 is going to be $50. That's just enough to finance the exterior wall around the community. What are the net benefits? Well, the benefits total $65 in total minus the $50 cost. It's going to give you net benefits of $15. It's an economically efficient outcome. The green wall gets built. Farms A and D are happy with the government because they're getting greater benefits than they're actually paying in taxes. So Farm B is getting $15 in benefits but paying $8.33. So they're happy. Farm A is happy. Farm D, all of these exterior farmers are all happy. But farmers E and F are not going to be necessarily happy with the government in this particular case, right? Because they're losing money. $5 minus $8.33 is going to be negative. So Farm E and Farm F are going to feel somewhat exploited here. But maybe, like I said before, maybe they're not really being exploited. Maybe they're just being forced to pay this extra amount, reflecting the fact that they're in this favored position already in the community because they're in the interior of the community. And so they're getting, their benefit might actually be misrepresenting the true benefit that they're getting because they're relying on the protection from the other farm's placement, you know? So maybe it's not really unfair to be charging them $8.33 either in that particular situation. Now, suppose we opened this up and made it a democracy and said, well, let's propose this policy to build a wall and let's see if we get enough votes. Well, in this particular circumstance, they would get the votes because farms A, B, C, and D would all vote in favor because it gives them a net benefit of this policy. And farmers E and F would probably vote against it, but the majority would win. And so a democracy can lead to the provision of a public good which benefits in general the community overall. Good example of government working well. But what if government doesn't work well? What if we have a corrupt government? What if the government says, hey, well, we've got the power to tax and we can tax people whatever we want to tax them. And yeah, it's only $8.33 to build a wall per person. But what if we instead decided to charge them, I don't know, $20 per person? Let's take a bunch of money away from them instead. And what can they do about it? They can do nothing because the government is powerful, has the power of the police and the military behind them. They have the ability to lock you up if you don't pay your taxes. they can use the power and force of government against individuals in a not so good way. And suppose they do that here. Suppose they charge $20 for the farms. That's going to add up to a total of $120 taxes collected to finance the green wall. Now, let's say they build the wall, okay? They build the wall, and that leaves them an extra $70. And let's just say they give that to government officials who all live well and happily because they've been able to exploit their community to this extent. They could say, oh, well, we provided you the benefits of the wall, and we deserve to live well for that. And so the government officials take the extra money, have a big party, live well, and live potentially better than their constituents as a result of this particular scheme. Now, what are the net benefits? The net benefits are minus 55 for the community overall. But actually, you could say, well, the government is collecting the $70 and they're happier. So to the extent we count the governments as part of the community, we would say, well, actually, the community is better off. It's just that there's a inequality that's being caused. Some of the people are becoming enormously wealthy, the government officials, while all the farms are being squeezed and are actually losing vis-a-vis this whole wall construction scheme. Okay, so all the farms are unhappy. They feel exploited. They feel that the system is unfair and unjust. And there would certainly, no farmers would vote for this particular government, which is why for this government to work effectively, it's got to be willing to use the force of violence against its own citizens in order to compel them to pay the $20 and to force them into jail, for example, if they don't pay the $20. And this becomes a potential problem for government if the government goes too far and does not just abide by the desires of the people themselves. Now, let me assess this a little bit. So government, is it good, bad, or unnecessary? So the purpose of these examples is to show a couple of things. First, how the provision of public goods can solve the free rider problem and improve economic efficiency. And again, I want to highlight the word can. It's not that it will solve the problem, it's that it's possible to solve the free rider problem with an appropriate level of government intervention. Now, we don't necessarily need the government to provide the wall in this particular circumstance. The community itself might be able to band together, talk to each other, and as long as the community is relatively small, they might be able to put enough social pressure on individuals to actually all contribute, or get enough people to contribute that the free riders are just an annoying outcome, and that you can snub them in society in the future. But I want to highlight the fact that this private collective action is an alternative to the government providing that public good. It's not quite a private firm trying to do it, but it's again, it's a community kind of cooperating with each other to try to provide for the needs of that particular community. And that does happen from time to time in the real world, and there's plenty of examples where that can work. But the government, third bullet point here, has to be constrained in its use of power. A corrupt government can overtax and transfer money for the benefit of the government officials themselves, and this would be a bad outcome. So here, government could be good, government could be bad if it's corrupt, or government could be unnecessary if private collective actions can take place to solve the problem instead. So government, good, bad, or unnecessary? Answer, yes. It can be good, it can be bad, or sometimes it can be unnecessary, which is why the debate about government is an important one, and why there are different positions that people take about the role of government in the economic system or in society. Now, I want to talk a little bit real quickly about some other ideas of Mansur Olson. So let's go back and think about societies 5,000 or 10,000 years ago. When farming was just beginning, we were in the Neolithic age where agriculture begun. What was begun back in, again, 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, more like 10. And it was true and valid that communities needed protection in those early days, both internally from internal community theft, but they also needed protection from external bandits. So it would not be atypical or unusual for a small community of farmers to get raided from time to time by bandits in the area. Well, one thing Mansur Olson talks about in his later writings is what if these roving bandits who go around from community to community just stealing stuff from others, What if they decide to settle down and just plop themselves down in the community and say, hey, we're the government? Olson calls these stationary bandits. What if the bandits just sit down and say, oh, well, we have the power over you. We have superior weapons. We have the ability and willingness to use violence and superior force against you. And here's what we're going to do for you. We're going to police the community, make sure people don't steal from each other, because that's going to be good for production, and it's going to help become more prosperous. And we're going to provide you external protections from threats from abroad, from outside. So forget about us stealing from you anymore. We're not going to raid you, but we're going to stand in place, and we're going to tax you for the benefits that we're providing to you. In this particular case, the stationary bandits now don't want the community to die away. They don't want to tax them so much that they discourage production and all of the farmers just die off or leave. Instead, they want to leave them free enough to produce a taxable surplus. They want to be able to take a lot of the surplus away, but keep them just well enough in order to survive. Subsistence level of standard of living, in other words. So we create internal law and order, and taxes or tribute gets paid to the rulers. And the rulers then call themselves kings, they become tyrants, or they even rise up to the level of being a god, where all of the less powerful people in the community who are producing things actually have to pay tribute or taxes to the rulers who are overseeing and providing some level of external and internal protections to justify their existence. Okay, and this is kind of, think about it. Go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and think about how governments were organized and whether governments were there to kind of do the will of the people. I don't think that was necessarily true in most communities and most governments 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Okay, and this becomes an example of governments that can sort of take over an area. They act not like a beneficiary, a good government that's trying to just provide useful services to people, but instead they act like a stationary bandit. They just sit in place and they exploit the people who are under them, using their willingness to use force and commit violence against their subjects if necessary and when necessary. How do we prevent that tyranny from taking place? Well, democracy is one of those methods. And it's one of those things that developed a long time ago in ancient Greece, but then reinvented in the Enlightenment period. And it makes leaders accountable to the people, and leaders must reflect the will of the people. So democracy is this method that's risen up against oppression and against tyranny and against kings and monarchies and this and that, where those rulers are subjecting their subjects to a lower standard of living and squeezing them for everything they've got, rather than giving them the individual freedoms to make their own lives and to improve themselves. It is these freedoms, perhaps, that came about with the democratic movement that actually is responsible for what's sometimes called the Great Enrichment. And that has to do with the just incredible increase in living standards that have occurred in the world since about the year 1750 or so, since industrialization took off. Democracy certainly played some role in that. I don't know exactly how much, but an important one.